Computer. Hello and welcome to the Comprehensive Support for the Most Vulnerable Student Populations during COVID-19 panel discussion. My name is Shayla Thomas and I serve as the Executive Director for the Young Scholars Program. On behalf of Dr. James L. Moore III, Vice Provost for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, welcome to our panel discussion. Today, I'm joined by three colleagues who are going to share with you their experiences dealing with students during COVID-19. Kara, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning. My name is Kira Carson. I am a program coordinator and success coach and course instructor for the Young Scholars Program at The Ohio State University in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Primarily, I work with our upper class scholars, so third year and beyond. In that, my goal is to prepare them for post-baccalaureate pursuits, whether that be full-time employment, going into the military as an officer, or graduate or professional school.
Thank you, Kara. Hi, Ms. Armada. How are you? Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, hi. My name is Armada Henderson. I serve as the Assistant Director for the Young Scholars Program in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I supervise a team of 4 success coaches who work solely with undergraduate students, undergraduate student programs, and undergraduate student services within the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We provide a variety of services in the form of success coaching, mentoring, courses that we teach and administer for students. We represent our team and our student populations across campus on committees and educating our colleagues within the university, and that those are some of the responsibilities that we have within the office.
And Tuweri, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tuweri Williams. I serve as a program coordinator for the Young Scholars Program. I primarily work with first-year students, providing success coaching to our first-year cohort. And then I also manage a team of about 22 peer mentors for our first-year students.
Thank you. And so while we all serve as experts and we have experience working with students in vulnerable populations, we do not contend to be experts on COVID-19. Today, it is our intent to share with you our experiences as we've been working with students who have been affected and impacted by COVID-19. Armada, I'm going to begin with you. From your perspective as a Director of Undergraduate Student Success Services, what are issues you've anticipated as students begin to transition home into the virtual learning environment?
I think as we begin to talk about some of the issues that we anticipated for our students, I think it's important to talk about the population itself. And so the group of students that we primarily work with in the Young Scholars Program are first generation college students. They are low-income college students, and they are also academically talented. And so our program is housed in 9 cities throughout the state of Ohio, and we recruit those students and invite them to our program in the 8th grade, and then transition them when they are coming in for their freshman year to our undergraduate student services. And so that unique population of students often comes with unique challenges. And so those are some of the things to consider and to think about as we focus on, what were some of the major concerns that we had. We definitely had a variety of different things that we came to consider when we found out that we were going to be transitioning to online learning here at Ohio State. Of course, we could not focus on all of those as a priority to initially start. And so there were 3 things that we felt were significant at the time due to the decisions that the institution had made. So the institution moved to online learning, and then almost immediately students were required to move out of the residence halls. And so our immediate concerns started with transportation and housing for those students. And then we were also very concerned as well about their access to technology. One of the things to keep in mind for low-income students and low-income families in general during the COVID crisis is that transportation is usually a major concern for those families. Sometimes those families will only own one vehicle, and so that vehicle is used to transport everyone for work, all of the children for school. Sometimes those families do not have or own a vehicle, and so public transportation is the means that gets them around. And at that time, we knew that there were going to be some limitations on public transportation as well. Those students may rely on extended family members for rides, and so something like moving out of the residence hall, taking all of their belongings, that requires a lot of prior planning for a low-income student. And so we did have at least one student who we had to have a staff member who drove from their city of origin, pick that student up and move them back home. Another concern, of course, was housing. We did have emancipated students. Technically, those students have no legal parent or guardian that had not planned to return home. And so now these students in some ways were potentially going to be displaced. And then we had other students who needed to make alternative living arrangements. So that had to be done as well. And then I think we're learning more and more about the digital divide as COVID progresses. And so that was a major concern for our students as well. Of course, at OSU, we have first and second year student cohorts who had received technology through our digital grant that we had received. And so they had iPads that they could use to complete work. So that would be something that would serve as a resource for them. But then we also had our third and fourth years who would have had to secure technology on their own during their college career in order to be involved in online learning. And so whether or not those students had technology that was reliable, Wi-Fi that was reliable, that they could use during this time to engage in online learning, that was a concern as well.
Thank you. And Kira, you work with third and fourth year scholars. What were some of your immediate concerns related to the scholar upperclassmen?
I think first that Armada just mentioned, those students who needed to move off campus. I have very few scholars, but of those, I made sure to reach out immediately to let them know that we were here to support them in any way that we needed, and that there was a process to apply for an exception through university housing if they felt like returning home was not in their best academic interest. And so we walked through some of those processes with them. Additionally, most of my students are employed, and a lot of them work anywhere from 25 plus hours a week, all the way up to full time. Some of them have 2 or 3 jobs. And so I knew that income was going to be an issue. And so I immediately started thinking about how we could prepare work alternatives for them, helping them seek out stay-at-home work through if they were employed by work study or wage on campus, if they could do work at home, and or creating our own remote work home opportunities document that we posted and keep updated on our Carmen site so that students can go there and look for jobs so that they don't have to worry about replacing that income as regularly. And then lastly, of course, we referred to the loaner program and digital flagship for those scholars who did not have either tablets or hotspots, because people might even have laptops but didn't have the actual internet access. So we wanted to make sure that. And then lastly, I had a lot of conversations with scholars about how to have the conversation with their families of origin once their families became aware that they needed to move off campus. Even though most of my students were already off campus, their families also wanted them to come home to their home cities of origin or their homes of origin. And a lot of scholars didn't want to do that, either because they didn't feel like the environment would be conducive to learning, or that they just didn't feel safe. And so coaching them through the conversation to have with their parents or guardians or whomever about why they wanted to remain off campus in Columbus at their apartments, so that in a way that is respectful, but also still establishes the students' autonomy as an adult and making sure that they're able to prioritize their education.
Yes, thank you, Kira. Tuiri, you manage a peer mentoring staff. What were some of your immediate concerns at the start of the COVID-19 crisis?
So at the start of the crisis, I would say my immediate concerns first were just the students and the families. And so managing a peer mentoring staff that I think primarily comes from the student population that we serve. So they also too are a part of these most vulnerable populations. I would say that was my most pressing concern. And then two, just managing a student staff in general can often be difficult because they have multiple competing commitments. And so just realizing, okay, well, one, will I be able to support our students so that way they're able to provide the same kind of like support at the same capacity, if not a higher capacity now during this crisis. And then two, just how can I effectively manage them to manage their own issues that they're experiencing, as well as supporting our first year staff or first year students.
So the Office of Diversity and Inclusion sent a survey to ODI funded and affiliated students during the first week of the stay-at-home order to understand students' immediate concerns and needs for technology. More than 400 undergraduate and approximately 150 graduate students responded to the survey. Armada, what steps did you take to proactively address students' concerns in the responses to the survey?
There we go. So I think one of the very first things that we did, we just began to collect information. So if everyone remembers correctly, the email from President Drake went out very late on the evening of the 9th. And so most of us returned back to campus that next day. And that's when we were informed that these changes were going to be made in the way that we provided services for students in wake of the COVID response. And so, as you mentioned, Shayla, one of the first things that we did was to sit down and draft a version of the survey that really would address a lot of the concerns that were previously mentioned, in this webinar. And so that was the very first thing that we did. And so we were able to collect over 1/3 of those responses within a day of launching that survey. And so the student voice really became very key to the interventions that we designed in response to what was happening with the pandemic. By that Friday, the staff had begun to work on the first written draft of resources that we could disperse to students, and that focused on housing and technology. And we were also aware that the students would have a lot of financial concerns as well. And so we included some payment assistance programs to help with finances, and also links to food pantries and other resources for our students who felt that they were food insecure. And then that resource was updated daily as we continued throughout our planning. And then information gathering, as I mentioned again, was very key. So every correspondence that came in from the university, we would save those messages. I also requested students send any correspondence that they were receiving from the university to us as well. So that way we could see what the messaging looked like from the student side, and we could compare that to the messaging that we were receiving. But then we were also able to follow up with a lot of our colleagues across campus to ask questions about these communications. And so we immediately connected with housing, academic advising, student health, financial aid. Some staff members contacted the College of Social Work to see what types of community resources they were aware of. We had students who were abroad at the time that the institution transitioned, and so we needed to contact OIA to see what was happening with those students. And then again, just following up on a lot of different things. Kira mentioned that by that following week, that Monday of the following week, we had contacted ODEE and began to secure technology for students so that they would have technology to engage in online learning at home. And the team just began to test some of the different university systems that we had available to us to determine what would be most convenient and most flexible for our student population, as we determined how we should modify our service plan in response to decisions that were being made.
Thank you. And Kira, how did the needs of off-campus and non-residential students differ from those transitioning back home from living on campus in the residence halls?
I think that primarily one of the large areas was around income, simply because they do maintain their own residences off campus. And so having to worry about monthly rent, water, gas, electricity, all of that kind of stuff, it's still maintained. Even if they did decide to go to their home of origin, their city of origin, they still had to pay that, right? That's still due. And so one of the things Armada mentioned is the resource guide. So myself and another staff member put that together and regularly updated that, along with help from wonderful work study associate Jasmine Pierce, who did a lot of work on that and the remote work document. Because one of the things that I noticed is in that very first week, I was talking to a number of scholars who were informing me that they had gone out and gotten full-time jobs, literally 40-hour-a-week jobs, and that they were all in convenience stores, distribution warehouses, grocery stores, places that were hiring, but they were also very much increasing their possibility for exposure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I wanted to make clear is that while I understand the money part of it, right, because it's necessary to live, is there a way that we can think about this in an innovative way that can allow you to still earn money while not putting yourself at such great risk? And so for one of them, and so for us, it was that remote work for documents, or remote work from home document. I think the other piece of that was also trying to make sure that students weren't taking on too much work so that their studies would now suffer. So I'm talking about that balance of, yes, okay, you've gone and gotten a full-time job, but what does that look like when you need to take a quiz, you need to study, you need to prepare a paper, etc. The other thing that I worked on with them quite a bit was around creating study and school schedules for themselves. So even if they did elect to go home or stay here, they had to figure out what it means to be a fully online student when 99% of them were not that before, right? So we had to work through and spend some time working with colleagues over at the Dennis Learning Center and their academic coaching about how to prepare a schedule for yourself that allows you to succeed. It's also reasonable, and that we are working in a global crisis, right? We're not just working and going to school from home. We are working through a pandemic and going to school through a pandemic. And so recognizing that and the mental health toll that that may take, in addition to whatever other responsibilities or obligations they may have had personally or from their families.
Yeah. Tueri, the Ohio State University offered housing and meal plan refunds to first and second year students who moved out of campus in the residence halls. From your experience with students, how were these funds utilized to support their transitions home?
So I would say to support their transition home, a lot of the students used those funds, one for technology. And so once they were transitioning home, they were also, like Kara mentioned, transitioning to online learning. And so a lot of our first year students, they did receive their iPads through the digital flagship grant, but however, a lot of them were also utilizing things like the library to kind of, access different programming, things of that sort. And so some of them were using those funds to possibly purchase a computer or another form of technology. I will also say second, and probably the most pressing thing that they were using their funds for were to support their families. And so a lot of our students, they see themselves as like a primary contributor to their families. And so using that money now, since they are also staying in the residence, staying with their family, they are, contributing to bills, food, things of that sort, whether they, parents were losing positions, but they also, a lot of them felt like they did have to contribute if they were going to be home.
Yeah. Armada, about 80% of your undergraduate enrolled students have a zero expected family contribution and are awarded a financial aid package that meet 100% of demonstrated financial need. How are students taking advantage of the Together as Buckeyes emergency grant program funded by the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act?
Well, the students' ability to secure financial assistance was, a major concern, and then especially from the university, because the initial funds that rolled out through Student Life, the young scholars were not able to take advantage of those funds unless they found a way to increase their cost of attendance, or they decreased the amount of money that they were receiving in other areas like work study. Work study was something that was significant and very important for our student population. And so what would happen, because they were packaged up to 100%, they would just have no space for additional funds. And so the emergency grant allowed our students to request aid regardless of their current financial aid package. It made space for those funds for them. And so most of those students were using those funds for basic needs. And so we're hearing that students are using CARES money to pay their rent, to purchase food, pay utilities. Tuweri mentioned additional technology. Some of those students have used that fund for medical care. We anticipate that they'll use that money for child care. And our colleagues over in student financial aid, we're hoping that we'll be able to collect some data in the near future to determine exactly how that money has been utilized by different populations at the university.
And then Kara, Ohio State University held a virtual commencement for graduating students on May the 3rd. What were the students' emotional responses to transitioning to a virtual commencement?
I think there were two immediate ones, one being that they were very happy that the university was going to do something, because I think some of them were afraid that nothing was going to happen. And for our population specifically, our students have been, if they're graduating this year in our program, typically for 10 years. And so they have been banking on May 3rd, 2020 for years, right? And so the idea, though, that there would be nothing to commemorate this occasion for them, or at the very least, not the commemoration they expected, was just heartbreaking. And so we kind of had discussions where we would kind of cycle through those feelings and process. And one of the things that I did is ask ODI to allow me to get the graduation stoles and lapel pins that we send out to all of our affiliated students who participate in our recognition ceremony, and go ahead and mail those out prior to graduation, so that students had them once commencement came, and if they wanted to watch it, they could wear their outfit, especially if they had not gotten their cap and gown. And so what we found in is that people were then posting their pictures and their stoles and their Pennell, and they were so happy and excited because here they had this piece of graduation at least, and they had it in their hands, and they were able to somehow celebrate the occasion. The other thing I did is also developed a list of ideas of ways that students could celebrate the commencement being sheltering in place. So that, we had ideas all the way from, having a drive-by parade, getting your cap and gown, wearing your stoles and your cords or whatever else. And then, people just driving by your house for an hour and waving and, music or whatever. Also talked about having watch parties for commencement, since it was going to be online, inviting people to watch parties on Facebook or using Facebook Live, doing your own mini commencement, right? Having whoever is in your household, a parent, guardian, friend, whatever, give you an actual, this actual spiel that you get when you graduate. The commencement website has it up, and so people were able to recite it if they wanted to. And though their degrees were mailed later, it still let them have a moment of, okay, this is about me, the culmination of my hard work. And then I've been able to be celebratory, because I also realized that as a first-gen student, I'm not just graduating, right? I'm bringing whole families, whole communities, churches, etc., with me, neighborhoods. And so I want them to also be able to celebrate this, which normally with a traditional commencement ceremony we'd be able to do. But because of COVID-19, we were not. But there were other ways to still involve each other. And then they're all very much looking forward to the rescheduled commencement. Students have made it clear that wherever they are in the country, they plan to come back for commencement. They are not playing, and they mean it, because they have dreamt of this day for years and they want to see it fulfilled.
Yeah, thank you. Ohio State academic advisors have reported a decline in student meetings. However, YSP Success coaching meetings have increased by almost 10%. As you are engaging students in appointments, I'm interested in gaining more insight into how students are responding to returning home or staying in Columbus away from their family and friends. So Armada, how have students socially, emotionally, and psychologically managed during the pandemic?
There we go. So one of the things that we would do in response to the survey, the staff, were wonderful in following up with those students immediately. And they would refer those students to wherever they needed to go, but then they also spent a lot of time talking to the students about what they were going through.
Mm-hmm.
Thing that assisted us immensely was that we had a comments box on the survey, and students could actually type in how they were feeling, indicate what was going on with them, to give us a sense of where they were in the middle of the pandemic. And so I was able to go through some of their responses, and it really made me think about emails that I had received and things that students had said as well. But these are just some of the, I wrote down some of the things that the students started off their comments with. So one student said, "I am in desperate need. It is a disaster. I am having trouble. I have been struggling," which we saw a lot. "I'm worried. I don't know what to do. This is frustrating and I am extremely scared." And one student said, "Everything seems unbearable." Students were really overwhelmed with this transition. If you really think about it, none of them had signed up to be online learners. They had all signed up for an on-campus experience. They were having a lot of difficulty managing the amount of correspondence, the emails that they were receiving from university staff, from instructors, and different departmental contacts. Academically, they felt that their syllabi for the classes had completely changed, and so they were trying to figure out how to manage a new way of learning, new content with their courses. We found that we had students who were having a lot of difficulty just balancing their college student identity with their family expectations. And not to worry, but Kira touched on this a little bit as well. They had a lot of increased responsibilities at home. Many of them were babysitting now. They were also homeschooling their siblings and the siblings of like extended family members, doing a lot of chores at home. As we know, with this student population, they have parents, they have family members who are considered to be frontline workers. And so some of those family members were still at work, and the responsibility of the home and the children, younger children, was taken on by some of our students. And also we have parents who were back home that were laid off or had lost their jobs. And so as Kira and as Tuweri mentioned, we had students who are working a lot of hours to help support their families. And Shayla and I know we saw that firsthand when we had students who were in Zoom meeting with us that were actually at work. I believe that a common mechanism for some of the students when they are overwhelmed is to disengage. And so it was very important for us to approach the work with compassion and then also flexibility. So providing, windows of times that students could connect with us, making sure they could do that with different ways, different forms of technology, whether just calling on the phone or video chatting with the staff. The staff primarily contacted those students on the phone. And then again, as I mentioned before, we really depended on our colleagues for extended resources to support our students mentally and emotionally. Our embedded counselor has been a great resource for our staff and our students during this time. And then some of our colleagues like Tracy Lewis over at Access Collaborative, she's been able to connect a lot of our students with community resources for therapy and counseling as well.
Thanks. Taweri, can you provide insight on the issues students are facing as they return home related to the school life balance? And have students expressed changes in their motivation to actively engage in schoolwork and school related activities?
I would say insight related to just the issues that they're experiencing as they return home with the school life balance. I think a lot of them struggled with that initially. I think there were some students who transitioned home just fine because a lot of them do have parents who are kind of essential workers. And so at that point, they were at home by themselves and, spending, if they were at home by themselves, they were also they had siblings, they're helping their siblings with their schoolwork, things of that sort. And so kind of managing that additional responsibility. But then also to something that we talk a lot about, I think as a staff, is our students' identity as a scholar. And so I think they had kind of experienced a lot of dissonance with that, where there's kind of this like conflicting identity, myself as a scholar and then myself as who I am at home and my responsibilities related to that. And so, some scholars, they, like Kara mentioned and Armada mentioned, they got home and they were like, okay, I need to help my family. I need to be of support. And so they went and got 40-hour-a-week jobs, or they went and some of them working at Amazon warehouse overnight. And so a lot of professors and some of the courses did not allow for that flexibility in their schedule. And so that, I think, is when there was like kind of that point of contention where, you're working until 7 a.m. and then you're supposed to get on a Zoom call at 9 for class. And so at that point, can you be that productive in class? Not so much. And so I think that a lot of that was that issue, along with, again, the technology issue, shared technology across the family, the Wi-Fi not being strong, all of those issues. And so, and then to their motivation changing for sure. And so working with first year students, again, with that identity, I think within their second semester, they're fully kind of expressing their, like, just kind of taking responsibility for their identity and just like fully embracing it. And so they're like, I'm a scholar, and they're getting into the groove of being on campus, and we're really excited to finish out this semester strong. And I think this kind of impacted them that way. And so a lot of them got home and didn't feel as, I would say, kind of just like encouraged to do their work. And so that's more so, I think the motivation kind of went down at that point, as well as just with it being an unprecedented time of it being a pandemic. I think there were all of these kind of multiple weighing things on them that kind of caused some difficulty for our first year scholars.
I can recall in a conversation during a Zoom session with the first and second year scholars mentioning missing being in an environment where everyone is focused on education. And so having to split their focus at home on being themselves, the person, right, and then being a scholar. And so they missed being on a campus where everyone around them, even their support persons, were focused on them achieving their education or receiving their education.
I think one thing to think about, in addition to what Taweri just said, about how about motivation, and as we move forward for faculty or instructors who may see this, another thing that kept coming up in my conversations with scholars was around the necessity of using the camera and having the camera on, right? Because we very well have scholars who did not want to have their home life, even just the background shot. And so, but professors not being flexible and requiring that, not understanding that not everybody is proud of their home or wants to share that part of themselves. And so understanding what that looks like as well, because I think some of us take for granted, oh, well, why wouldn't you just turn on your camera? Well, when in fact it makes you uncomfortable, or it's seen as, I don't want people to know the insides and outsides of what my house looks like, or my neighborhood, or wherever the case may be. And so that's something that people who are instructing can really take to heart, to understand that this is another way for you to help and address this particular population, because you can't assume that everybody, is comfortable and is willing to share, or even has the permission of the people in the household to whom the house belongs to share, right? So I think that's another thing to think about. But all of that went to motivation, because I had a scholar who specifically said she was going to get a grade lower in a class because she refused to turn on her camera. Well, she didn't divulge that to the instructor because she didn't feel safe, because he was the person who mandated the camera be on, right? So she's like, well, I'm not going to tell him. I'm just going to take my lower grade and keep it moving. But that's how, in a lot of ways, maybe instructors and administrators and all of us are standing in our own way of trying to help students, right? We think we're being helpful. We think we're thinking about things, but there's really a whole nother reality. And so better for us to ask rather than impose.
Mm-hmm. Think in changing direction just a little bit, Kira, but still talking about students, how has the national pandemic impacted upperclassmen and graduating students' job search and admissions to graduate and professional schools?
Certainly. We have several scholars every semester that graduate and go on to grad school, and this semester was no different because most had already applied last semester. And so we have great acceptances. Some students got accepted with full funding, some got accepted with fellowships, which are amazing. But really the conversation now is, do I go? Right? Because, and that's the conversation, millions of college students are having all across the country and world even. Mm-hmm. Do I actually go to a brick and mortar place that's going to have lots of people coming from different backgrounds and have exposures to different things, who have different cleanliness or hygiene habits? Is this something that I want to do? And so that's for some of them what they are weighing. We've had scholars who've decided to defer, and scholars who've said, no matter what, I'm going. Or scholars who are waiting to see, right? And say, well, when the university decides and announces how it's going to conduct classes come autumn, then I'll make a decision on whether or not I'm going to defer or if I'm going to go. So I think that in that piece, that's been great, because a lot of that was done pre-COVID. So now they're just in decision-making, right? But for the students who plan to apply, I think that now they're feeling a little more discouraged, especially even those who are also planning to, look for this great first college out of job, right? And now they're facing this particular economy. But so one of the things that I try to be very upbeat about and positive about is like, well, what are the ups of this, right? So now you can look at jobs that previously would have required you going into a building to go work. Well, now you can look, a lot of jobs are being posted and they're remote, because we now realize that you can do most of our jobs without being in a brick and mortar building. And so that even widening the swath, because if they were stuck to a particular city, you have limited. But now when you can work for a company that's based in Sweden or California from home, that's another way to think about it. And so people would be like, oh yeah, that's good. That's right. So that's something else to think about. The other thing that I've been very intentional about is making sure that I'm as educated as I can be about the state of the economy and employment, because I get emails all the time about it, like, should I bother? What should I do? That kind of thing. And so I'm constantly educating myself, trying to make sure that I have good information and then passing it along to scholars as I get it because there are lots of careers and industries that are booming right now. I was on a webinar last week with Boeing, right? So I'm thinking of all of my aerospace engineering majors. Hey, they're expecting this huge boom. A lot of the tech people, so computer science majors, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to keep it in mind and keep people at that. Like, don't just start worry about, these unemployment numbers and letting that dictate your job search. We've always created a job search strategy for our scholars, so that they're clear on how to go about looking for their first real job, as they call it. And then also making sure they're advocating and they're using all of the other resources available to them. So whether that be their department's career services, that means university career counseling, their advisors, that kind of thing, just making sure that you are taking full advantage of what is before you, in addition to also utilizing your human and social capital, because 86% of people get their jobs by word of mouth, not by applying blindly from a website or anything like that. So does everybody in your life know that you're looking for a job? Your mom's best friend, your cousin, your pastor, your neighbor, your advisor, former teachers, everybody needs to know you're graduating and looking for something, because we all get things across our desk. We're like, oh, that sounds cool. But we don't have any idea who we could possibly share it with, right? So it just goes into our deleted bin. But if you know that, and if you're utilizing that capital, then those people know, oh, let me forward this to so-and-so. Because they hit me up a couple months ago letting me know that they're job searching, or a couple of weeks ago. So it's kind of been a combination of all of those things, but students are just kind of a little bit all over the place, which I think has just been kind of par for the course for pandemic.
Yeah. I want to transition and ask you all some questions about what you've learned in supporting student success through a national pandemic. So Armada, in your opinion, what are the advantages of the Young Scholars Program, or what advantages does the YSP have over other university support service offices seeking to support students through a national crisis?
Well, I think that the number one benefit is that we have been engaged with these students for a very long time. And YSP is a community of student scholars. It's a community of staff and extended colleagues and support across the state. And so, you know, those students, we've had extensive and continuous interaction with those students over the years. And so there is a culture of trust that has been developed within our community. Parents trust that we will take care of their children. The students trust that we will give them good counsel and support. And that's partly, you know, due to the fact that all of our staff are first generation. We would consider ourselves to be low income. And then we even have some YSP alum that are on the team. We understand the unique challenges associated with those identities and engaging in education in this environment, because this environment also brings unique challenges. It is a PWI, and so in some circumstances, in some instances, the response to the crisis has been in support of the majority student population. And so I think as a team, it's our responsibility to really shed light on some of those concerns and issues that maybe would not have been addressed before. Some other things that have really been to our advantage, you know, we are a student-centered program. And so while we have ideas about how we can address our populations based on best practices and our own experience, we also depend heavily on the students to tell us, you know, what's going on in their lives and what they need. And we want those things to converge. We want the student voice, we want the best practices, we want that anecdotal experience to come together to make for the best intervention on behalf of the students. And then unlike some other offices on campus, all of our students are from Ohio. And so that has made it a little bit easier for us to address and manage those students' needs. You know, we can go on and find food pantries for our students in Columbus, and, you know, that list will support all of our scholars who are living on campus, as opposed to some other offices who may have students in other states, other time zones. It would be more challenging to find resources to support those students' needs.
Yeah. Tueri, how can you help students to foster a sense of belonging if virtual learning persists into the 2021 academic year?
So I think some of the things that I kind of started to implement within this first semester or this spring semester, kind of like as a test run, again, kind of like what Armada was saying, is using that student voice. And so I think initially, just kind of like going back, but initially when COVID started, there was kind of just like some also dissonance with myself of wanting to keep everything the same. And so it's like, okay, well, we're just going to transition everything to Zoom, and not really thinking. I'm like, okay, well, let me think of how can I, you know, really make this program work. And so asking our students, what do they need? And so Zoom wasn't, like we learned, was not the best answer for our students. And so I put it on the students to just really create community amongst each other. And so typically their meetings would be, 1 hour individual, but now that they're home and they've also kind of developed that rapport with each other, they're like, well, we want to meet more as a group. And so some of them, they did do group Zoom meetings. They utilize Teams. I encourage them to use the House Party app. And so House Party is through Snapchat, and, students can play games with each other and, engage in that way. And so I think providing more spaces for them to, one, talk about their academic concerns, but also be more vulnerable to just talk about like what's going on with them personally. And so even in the Success Coach meetings, the first 15 minutes, it's just a check-in of, how are you? If you want to complain, use this time to complain and vent. A lot of them use the 15 minutes to talk about their parents, not understanding that if I'm sitting on the computer all day, it's not I'm sitting on the computer playing games. I am in lecture and I'm studying and I'm completing assignments. And so I think utilizing those same techniques of using the student voice and just being super connected in that way and giving them space to be vulnerable, I think that's how I will just foster virtual learning.
And Tuweri, just to clarify, and the first portion of your response was in response to your peer mentors meeting with their assigned students, correct?
Yes.
And your ratio is 1 to 7. What is your ratio for peer mentoring right now?
So right now it's about 1 to 6.
Okay.
And so, yeah, just using the different technology for them to meet, group wise, if it's, 1 peer mentor to 6 students or 2 peer mentors and 12 students, that kind of thing.
Got it. Kira, what have you learned about upper class students that was not prevalent before the nation entered a national crisis?
I don't know that I've learned anything new. I think what happened for me is I had a confirmation of a couple of things.
Okay.
And 2 things really stood out. One was resiliency, right? And I tell this to my scholars all the time, like, you all are amazing. I don't know if I could do what you do. Like, I'm trying to think back to your age, and if I could have made the choices and bounced back and got back up and shook myself off and moved forward. And sometimes my answer is no, when I think about myself, right? But they will keep going. The perseverance is amazing. Like, even if they're having an awful time of it, how else can I fix it? What else can I do, Ms. Carson? Who else do I need to talk to? And they are willing to put in the work so that they are academically successful and so that they are enjoying the collegiate experience, because that's a big part of what I tell them. It's like, college is also supposed to be fun, right? And so it's just not all school, right? It's not all work, but there should also be a part of this that is socially fulfilling for you and provide you with the greatest memories of your life, right? And so I think for me, that sense of resiliency has just been huge for them. I'm just so very proud of them. The other thing for me was what I would term generosity of spirit. And so by that, I mean, I always found that scholars were generous. When a scholar was in need, there was always somebody willing to step up to help, whether that be financially or socially or educationally. Oh, you're having trouble in physics? I got an A. Let me hook you up on the side. That kind of thing. But this for me really brought out a different level of generosity, because one thing that Armada mentioned is how on the survey, we had boxes for people to kind of let us know how they were doing or what they need or how they were feeling or things that we needed to think about. And so for scholars who put something that, we thought, okay, let's follow up on this, he did. One scholar I did follow up with her, and she literally told me that, and this was in the period when scholars were having to move off campus, she was like, if somebody needs a place, I have an extra room in my apartment. Okay. So I'm thinking, this girl doesn't even know who could possibly be this other person, but she was willing to offer her second room to a scholar. Mm-hmm. She's like, long as they don't have COVID, that was her one restriction. But other than that, she was completely up for putting up, for all intents and purposes, a stranger into her apartment, because she knew scholars would not always be comfortable or able to go back home. Yeah. Right. And then another example of that is another scholar who, when I reached back out to her about from the survey about something that she may need or whatever, she was like, she told me what she needed, but at the very end, she put in large caps at the bottom, and I wrote it down. She put, if you have limited resources, make sure you focus on the students who are in need now, right? So here she is, a student in need, but still prioritizing other students above herself. Like I'm always impressed, I always admire, and I'm always blown away by our scholars. And for me, this is probably the biggest piece I'm taking away.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. There are so many uncertainties about the lasting effects of COVID-19. Student support services and how students engage the university may look different from the past. And so, Armada, what changes are you making during the pandemic that may become permanent for YSP to continue to provide student support services?
I think, as we're hearing from higher ed institutions about some of the transitions that they're going to be making in the fall, we're primarily hearing about the use of technology and online learning, how that's going to continue, and then also shortened semesters and changes to the academic calendar. And so I think we really have to consider the value added of online learning opportunities. I think that we work at very traditional college and we've been somewhat resistant to that. I remember in the past, trying to introduce online technology to other programs and services, and there was just no buy-in for it. And now it's something that everyone is using. And so we really are going to be looking at the value and the advantages of remote meeting spaces, virtual interactions with students and staff, and how these different technologies may become a part of our everyday work life. As a team, that's going to require us to really think about how that influences our programs and our service models and how we're managing and providing these services for students, and what that looks like to address their concerns without adding any additional barriers that keep them from engaging with the different things that we have available to them.
And then this question is open to anyone who would like to respond. What strategies have you employed that are key to continued programmatic success during this widespread crisis?
I think if we, when we get back into the office eventually, I think that I'm always going to now incorporate a good segment of my communication being technology-based. Because it was not before we did one-on-one in-person meetings for everything, with the occasional, phone meeting because somebody was running late or something came up. But I think in a more intentional way, doing it this way, because what I have found is that scholars are much more forthcoming. Most of the scholars that I've worked with for the last 3 years. So they know me well, I know them well. They tell me stories about their families, their friends, their situations, all of that kind of thing. But I found even more information over the last couple of months, things that were highly personal, very intimate, extremely private. And I think maybe there is something to be said about them feeling more forthcoming because we're using technology, because they don't have to look a person in the face, right, in a building that also houses so many other people that other people might be able to overhear. They're able to say what they're really struggling with or go into depth about something. And so I definitely want to continue to use this in an intentional way in terms of giving scholars an opportunity and a choice of, would you prefer to have this in in-person meeting or a remote meeting? Because I feel like it's definitely strengthened my relationship with a lot of them.
I would say maybe.
Go ahead, Tuari.
Okay. No, I would say maybe on just like the peer mentoring side, I spent a lot of time kind of sitting in on conversations with our peer mentors, because a lot of them were just, I think, nervous, like it was unprecedented time. So like, well, can you come and, can you sit in on this phone call and I have with a scholar because they had a question. And so whether it was just me like kind of popping in the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the video call or the phone call, I think that's something that I'll implement more, I think, moving forward. So that way they kind of just have like a coach to get them started and get the conversation started with their first year students.
That's good. That's good.
I'm always very proud of the way that the staff, we work together as a team, and, we already meet frequently as a group or individually, and that has been very helpful to make sure that we are talking through these issues that are impacting the students the most, and then coming up with ideas and interventions that have been very important to address the needs of all of the students. And so that's definitely something that we will continue. But then I also think that it's very important to focus also on the health of the staff. And so this really has brought to light just the importance of self-care in managing these student experiences, because these the experiences of the students have a significant impact on the staff as well, because they're hearing these stories and engaging with these students. And I think that as a supervisor, that's something that I have to keep in mind, and I want to continue to be mindful of that as we move forward. I think that quickly collecting information for the team and reading up on changes and things that are happening in light of the pandemic, that's going to continue to be important for us. And so making sure that I'm forwarding information and articles so that they feel up to date and can kind of glean what may be happening in education in response to decisions that are being made regarding the pandemic. I think that that's going to be important. One thing that I did realize is that I think as a university, we do a good job. Well, not in all areas. I don't think we do a great job of providing students with on-hand resources.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Carmen site now that we utilize to provide students with a lot of resources that are available to them on campus. But I think that this pandemic shed a light on the importance of connecting students with community resources as well. That's one area that we'll be kind of working on, continuing to make sure that we're collecting information about community resources that students can use, in and out of a pandemic, because these are resources that have been very helpful to students. And then the last thing I think which has been really important is just, I think that the team, we responded very quickly to the needs of the students, and that made all of the difference. And so, what I found is that the timing of the intervention is very important. And if you do not have a well-timed intervention, it can or break the impact of what you're doing. And so just continuing to not respond just off the fly or out of need to feel that something has to be done, but to actually continue to use the information that we gather in educating ourselves, are coming together to determine what is the best timing for these interventions so that they can have the greatest impact on supporting our students.
Sure. That concludes all of the questions that I have for you all. I want to thank you, each of you, for spending time with me this afternoon and answering all those questions and the insightful information that you provided to our listeners and those who joined us in our initial panel discussion. For more information about the Young Scholars Program, you may visit our site, odi.osu.edu. And this session has been recorded, and so we'll also have this information available there as well. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.